All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, small fans about ladies, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived in my train of thought. It's time to talk about Week 6 of the NFL season, but before I do that, I've got to give flowers to what I've called Judgment Day. That was last weekend in college football. There were 5 big-time games, and 4 of them were amazing. One lived up to the expectation that is Texas destroying worlds, and in this case, Oklahoma. Okay, we understood that. But then, the Penn State game with USC, and Tyler Warren's the best tight end in the country. That was an excellent game. The Ohio State-Oregon game was an excellent game coming down to the end, although Will Howard was really dumb for doing the Dak Prescott move. That was really dumb, but it was a great game between 2 of the 5 best teams in the country. That's 4 of the 5 best teams in the country I just talked about, by the way. Texas, Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. Those teams are awesome. Then there's the LSU game with Ole Miss. Great battle between Dart and Nussmeier, and the latter throwing the game-winning touchdown pass at the end. That was great in overtime. And then to cap it off, the Colorado and Kansas State game. Yes, Travis Hunter got hurt. That's unfortunate. But that was a really entertaining game between 2 pretty solid Big 12 teams. K-State getting it done there. So we got 5 really intriguing, exciting caliber matchups. We got 3 of them going to overtime. We got 2 of them won by road teams, 2 of them won by home teams, and 1 won on a neutral site. And it's really a great college football weekend, one of the best weekends ever. And then this Saturday, it's Georgia, Texas, it's Alabama, Tennessee. I am so looking forward to all of this, plus a bunch of other good matchups. Anyway, let's get to Week 6 of the NFL season right now with a tale that seems to be as old as the last few years. San Francisco plays Seattle. San Francisco bullies Seattle. And this was the shocking part, not the game and how it played out, but the fact that Lumen Field was filled with a lot of Niner fans. There was a lot of red in those stands. Great uniform battle, too, by the way. Both throwbacks are dope. But the Niners took care of business early. They were the better team pretty much the entire evening. They were the more dominant and physical team the entire evening. And even when it was Seattle down a score, Geno Smith's got the ball, it just never got the vibe that, okay, Seattle's going to come back and steal this. Then Geno throws the catastrophic Eno. The Niners salted away with another touchdown for Juszczyk, and San Francisco keeps it moving and keeps it pushing. Seattle had their opportunity to kind of beat the narrative of they can't beat the Niners, and they could not beat the narrative or the Niners. Another narrative that's continuing is that, let's face it, Trevor Lawrence might not be that guy. At the very least, he's not that guy where the conditions aren't optimal, as in the team conditions aren't optimal. Obviously, they're not in Jacksonville, but stability isn't there either. Caleb Williams continues to improve, and really more to the point, Williams continues to do what he needs to do against the bad teams. He faced a lot of terrible defenses so far this year, and he's cooked pretty much all of them. Caleb, nonetheless, is improving as time has gone on, and is showing some of that incredible skill and incredible timing and awareness as he gets the ball to Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and Roma Dunzy and Cole Kmet, who was spectacular for a lot of this. I didn't mention about the versatility of Tyler Warren, where he's thrown footballs, he's caught footballs, he's run the ball. Cole Kmet did a little bit of that too. He was a long snapper. Tyler Warren did play as a center for a play, and then he scored on that play. And Kmet was a long snapper for a lot of this game, and he obviously caught a couple scores. Great work overall by Kmet and Caleb and the Bears. And for Jacksonville, this is another really ugly, really painful, humiliating loss. Next week may be a loser leaves town type time if the Jaguars are the loser. I may talk about that tomorrow. So I'm going to get to the AFC South, and we're going to get the easiest game that's left standing first out of the way. Houston did what they were supposed to do. They played a terrible Patriots team, and for the most part dominated a terrible Patriots team. But I will say this about Drake May. That Patriots offense looked different. It looked a little bit more dynamic. Yeah, he took lumps. That was expected. He turned over the ball. That was expected. But ultimately, Drake May looked pretty good. And he looked pretty capable and ready to go in the NFL. That first touchdown pass was amazing to see. There's no doubting or disputing that. New England's going to take some more lumps this season. This was the latest one, but there's some promise here. In a couple of years, New England, I think, will be fine. Check back with them there. Now to Tennessee, and the question is, will there be a Will Levis meme? Well, there might have been. There's a couple of candidates, one of which unfortunately took out a line crew's ACL, possibly, because he rolled in like a bowling ball and took out one of the people that was on the sideline. It was rather unfortunate. Levis also had a worthy meme towards the goal line later on in the game. But this game was not necessarily just about the memes. It was more so about the Titans' inability to take advantage of a Colts team that just wasn't playing all that well in this game. Flacco threw an in or two, and still the Colts were able to just survive because Tennessee just wasn't good enough to take the game from them. That's got to be the most frustrating part of all for the Titans, who had a real shot to win this game, had a real shot to effectively steal this game from the Colts, even after Mike Pittman scored that go-ahead touchdown with 7.5 minutes left. Tennessee had two chances, two real ones anyway, to snatch the game, and they just couldn't. The first one was the typical Will Levis mistake. He threw an NO of the second play of the drive while he was at his own 30. Fortunately for him, the Colts didn't do much with it, and then Tennessee punted away their last chance, their last real one anyway. And even with all of this, there's one thing that we've seen so far from the Titans. Whenever Will Levis has been healthy enough to finish a game, they lose. Point blank, period. That is not helping his case for the future. As for the Colts, they kind of survive their season and keep things going. The real question is, can they turn Anthony Richardson when he's healthy? And if they can't, can Joe Flacco keep this up and keep the Colts breathing? This next game is also fairly easy with the Cardinals and the Packers. Arizona made a bunch of mistakes. Green Bay punished them for it. Yes, the Packers' field goal kicking is still questionable, but the receiving core is not. Romeo Doubs came back. He cooked. Christian Watson, he scored a touchdown. Jalen Reed made some really good catches. Dontavius Wicks did what he could and did his thing. Tucker Kraft doing his thing as a starting tight end. The point is the Packers, when they are rolling, can be a very dangerous machine. They continue to handle their business, and Arizona just got another crash course of you're fun, you're talented, somewhat, but you're just not ready for this life quite yet. Also, the Marvin Harrison injury relatively sucks. That concussion's really not a great look. If only Cleveland had a competent quarterback. If that were the case, they would have won this game and humiliated the Eagles. The Eagles' offense still has not shown up until second quarters. They have yet to score in the first one, and effectively got bailed out because Cleveland just wasn't good enough to take advantage of this. A.J. Brown being back was a much, much needed thing. He had two really big catches, one early in the game, early in the second quarter of it for a touchdown, and one I'll get to in a little bit. But this Eagles offense, when A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, and Devontae Smith don't have the ball, is very alarmingly plain. Similar to last year in a way. And the series of events that led to Myles Garrett making another Herculean play to get a block kick, and Rodney McLeod, ironically, taking it back to the crib, making this a game, was quite alarming for Eagles fans. Barkley tried to get a first down, could not, and Jake Elliott, who's a great long-range kicker, couldn't get it over the outstretched hands of Garrett, who is a beast. This game really could have been won by the Browns had Cleveland just been disciplined. Way too many penalties, way too many false starts. The Eagles crowd at the lake absolutely helped win them this game because the Eagles' play on the field really didn't. It was a win for the Eagles that you just take and you run and you don't look back, quite honestly. For the Browns, it's just another week, not too far away from the factory of sadness. At least the Guardians made the ALCS. They didn't win any games in them so far, but at least they made the ALCS. The Beltway battle did not look like it was going to be good. Flowers really cooked the Commanders secondary. Derrick Henry was doing his thing. Lamar was doing his thing. And this was looking like this was going to be a beatdown, which is generally what the Ravens tend to do when it comes to NFC ops in the Lamar Jackson era. Yet something happened along the way to the bludgeoning. The Commanders didn't allow it. Jaden Daniels did pretty well, and though they couldn't run the ball that well without Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler was okay. It was Terry McLaurin who really stepped up as well. It's a shame that they lost Jonathan Allen for the season to a torn pec. That's a devastating loss for the Commanders. Anyway, Washington fought back, and they fought hard, but ultimately they couldn't fight away Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson closing it out at the very end. This is another really good win for the Ravens and for the Commanders. I know moral victories are not something that a lot of us do, but this is one of them. And there's no shame in losing this one, Washington. You just faced a team that's just a little bit higher in weight class. To be honest, if the Commanders won the NFC East, I would be perfectly okay with it. I think a lot of other people would be cool with it too. Yeah, the Saints aren't going to beat the allegations of just being a mediocre team. So let me get this right. Tampa Bay puts up 17-0 to start this game. One of those touchdowns being a defensive one by the returning Antoine Winfield Jr. as they knock out Chris Olave. Baker Mayfield starts to cook people early, and it's looking like a Tampa Bay game where they're just going to destroy the Saints and bring them all the more closer to mediocrity. Then the second quarter happens. Baker Mayfield forgets how to football, throws in-ohs to the Saints. There's turnovers all over the place. It's a disastrous second quarter for Tampa and an amazing one for the Saints. They put up 27 points in said quarter. And now the Saints have the lead going to half, and it's like, okay, this is going to be a fun game. And then for the Saints, it wasn't. They didn't score again. Tampa Bay matched that quarter with 27 points in the second half, which was good for Tampa Bay and not for New Orleans. The Bucs put up a 50-piece in the Bayou, and Tampa Bay probably could have done more damage had they not turned over the ball as much as they did. Baker threw 3 NLs, he threw 3 scores, but it just obviously didn't have the same impact because of the picks. Anyway, Tampa continues to handle business. They bounce back after that loss against Atlanta. That offense continues to roll, even though Mike Evans missed a considerable amount of time in this game. Bucky Irving continues to do his thing. Tampa will be tested next week. I will talk about that game tomorrow, but this is a good one for the Bucs. As for the Saints, the fall from most dominant offense in the league through 2 weeks to being back to mediocre within the span of a month, that is going to be studied and needs to be studied by future generations. Falcons had me concerned for a little bit, I'm not going to lie. It looked like Carolina was going to steal this game, just like they did last year. But Atlanta said, we're not going to do that. We're not those Falcons. And Bijan Robinson and Kirk Cousins made sure that, yeah, we're going to take care of business like we're supposed to. And they did. Good job, Atlanta. You're keeping the momentum going. You now have 3 wins in the division, 1 against each team. And you got one of your free ones against the Panthers out of the way. For Carolina, is there really anything you can do now? Does it make any sense to go back to Bryce Young? Does it make any sense to keep Andy Dalton in? I'm not sure there's a real right answer here. It's obvious they don't have their quarterback of the future on this roster, but it's just a matter of what can you really do? There's just no real hope here. If you go back to Bryce, okay, he gets his brains beat in and he looks lost out there. If you stick with Dalton, what hope do fans have for the future knowing full well that Dalton won't be a part of it? It's just a very hopeless feeling for a Carolina team that going into the Bryce Young trade looked like they were going to have some promise. And then absolutely everything has gone wrong ever since. For a quarter and change, I thought the Steelers also were in trouble of being that team that loses that devastating game to a team that they're maybe not far superior to, somewhat superior to. Pittsburgh did not lose that game. Why? Because that defense handled business. TJ Watt with the peanut punch, and they got a couple NLs thrown in there because Aiden O'Connell's not good. Najee Harris got a long touchdown run, not good for the fantasy stuff because I was playing against him. There's more on that in a little bit too. Baker helped, but there's more on that more than canceled out the damage that Baker did. Anyway, the Steelers took care of business in what was effectively a home game in Las Vegas, and they blew out the Raiders like they're supposed to. I don't think the Max Crosby shoving stuff is that big of a deal. It feels like cooler heads will prevail, and they squashed it later on. But will the Raiders be sellers at the deadline, and how much of a seller will the Raiders be? I think they should be all the way selling, except for maybe Max Crosby. He's probably untouchable at this point. So this Denver-LA Chargers game started bad for the Broncos and got progressively worse. It started with that NL by Bo Nix, and the Chargers made sure to punish the Broncos for it by scoring, and then PS2 got a concussion, and since Denver's on a short week, I'd have to think there's minimal chance he plays in New Orleans on Thursday, and then Denver's offense never got going, and then whenever they did, they were flagged for stuff. The Chargers offense had a bunch of people that a lot of people won't be able to name without programs, and they were still pretty productive. Herbert didn't crash the car. He didn't do anything dumb. He just made sure that the Chargers got to where they needed to get to. And it was a beatdown for a lot of this game. Denver made a late run, but a lot of those points were kind of sort of garbagey. Ultimately, this was a game that was really never in doubt, and the Chargers take care of business coming off their bye. Denver, I think, is still relatively okay, but that defense is far different without PS2 roaming one side of it. It's a shame, too, because the Broncos are starting to move. And then Bo Nix looks bad, and then PS2 is concussed, and things just never improved from that point. The good news is I had Jameer Gibbs in fantasy. The bad news is my opponent had Sam Laporta, David Montgomery, Dak Prescott, and the Cowboy defense. Now, the Cowboys portion of this did not do well and were pretty much terrible. The Lions portion of this for my opponent, they were awesome. Laporta had a long touchdown thanks to that beautiful flea flicker play. Montgomery scored twice, and he was far better than Gibbs was on Sunday in Dallas. This was a massacre that Detroit had circled on their calendar from the very second the schedule came out. But obviously, it's a minor Pyrrhic victory because Detroit lost their best player in Aiden Hutchinson. That was a devastating injury to see, and I saw the replay of it. It looked nasty, and unfortunately, it's a clean broken fibula. He gone for the year, and it's a backbreaker for a Lions team that, other than him, does not get to the pass rusher in the very least. To be honest, Jared Goff aside, let's take Goff out of this, it's probably the one injury the Lions could least afford to lose. That offensive line's so good, it feels like, okay, one of them goes down, they could probably manage with the other four because they're just so good and imposing. Hutchinson, I think, is the one injury that Detroit, Goff aside, could afford the least. And the fact that he's gone, where does Detroit get their edge rush from? And who has that kind of killer instinct that Hutchinson does? It's going to be hard to navigate the rest of these waters in the NFC and what's become the division of doom, for that matter, without their best player on defense. I mentioned the division of doom. All four teams now have 4 wins apiece in the NFC North. I mentioned the last couple of weeks that it's been really rough for the teams who've had byes. Last week, it was the Lions who had a bye. Everybody else won. This week, it's the Vikings who are off. Everybody else won. Now, this coming week, the Bears are off. But not everybody can win because those two teams that just had byes are going to be playing each other on Sunday. I will most certainly be talking about that game tomorrow. Now let's get to the primetime games, and for once, the Bengals defense showed up. Yet, the Bengals offense did not. Sans Joe Burrow run at the beginning and Chase Brown run at the end, there was a whole lot of nothing from the Bengals offense. And in part because the Giants defense carried them. Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, basically anybody else that could possibly get to Joe Burrow, they were relentless in doing so. Cincy's offensive line stood minimal chance against the Giants pass rush, which has been really good this year, to be honest. Brian Burns especially was an absolute menace, and I'm a little surprised Joe Burrow didn't get ruled out with a concussion because of the way his head slammed on the turf on one of those Brian Burns sacks. This was a really good performance by the Giants defense, and it's a shame that it was not accompanied by at least an average performance by the offense. Daniel Jones made a couple nice throws, but he too was hounded by Trey Hendrickson and company from the Bengals D-line. And it just never went anywhere. The Giants would commit some penalties, they would miss some throws, they would get stopped without Devin Singletary in the backfield, even though Taylor was decent at times. And it just never went anywhere until the opening and closing plays by the Bengals, one by Burrow on a 3rd and 18. Giants, you can't allow that. And then Chase Brown, who was trying to salt it away and get a first down, just goes to the crib and ices the game for Cincinnati. The Bengals needed this game badly. The Giants could have used it, but Cincinnati was desperate to get it, and actually did. Their game is going to be against an old foe next week, and a foe that has owned them over the last few years. What will they do about it in the Battle of Ohio? From one MetLife team playing a primetime game to the other MetLife team playing a primetime game in that same building. Unlike the last time the Bills and Jets played, Aaron Rodgers played the entire way. He made some really good throws. That Hail Mary at the end of the first half was spectacular. I mean, let's face it. It was controversial, sure, but it was spectacular to see that. Rodgers, throughout the evening, made some really good throws. Breece Hall made some really good runs. Yet, the Jets continued to jet because the penalties were absolutely ridiculous. There were a lot of them in this game, but the Jets committed some really, really bad ones that cost them major opportunities to get points. For example, the game is getting down to the nitty-gritties. It's 20-all, and the Jets just scored a touchdown. Yet they didn't because there was a holding call. And, okay, fine, that may cost them 3 points. No, it cost them 7 because their kicker, Greg Zuerlein, ends up doinking a chip shot off the upright, and he missed. And earlier in the game, Buffalo could have gained some points and put some distance between themselves and the Jets, and Tyler Bass misses a 47-yard kick wide to the right. I feel like we've been here before. Anyway, throughout the missed kicks, throughout the mistakes, throughout the penalties, and there were, again, a lot of them, and some of them catastrophic when it came to trying to gain momentum and or points. The Jets were down 3, Aaron Rodgers has the ball. Most people would love this situation. Jets fans wanted this situation because, okay, this is finally a time where Aaron Rodgers has that, oh, that's where we recognize him as a New York Jet. That's the legendary Aaron Rodgers type drive. It just never came to be. Rodgers tried his hardest to move the ball downfield, and he had a golden opportunity to take a deep shot with a wide-open Mike Williams. Except he underthrew him. And then Mike Williams slipped and hurt himself. And Terrion Johnson was able to scoop it up like a ground ball. Unfortunately, Terrion Johnson plays for the Bills and is a really good nickel corner for them. That's an NO. Josh Allen salted away 3 plays later. Blouses. Bills win a game that they probably shouldn't have won, and yet found a way to because Jet mistakes. And then the lasting image of the evening is not the Hail Mary. It's not the flags on the field, though there were a bunch. It's not the kickers who both sucked in this Monday night game. It's Aaron Rodgers on the bench contemplating life and why he decided to play for the New York Jets. It's a second straight home game where he's had this kind of look on his face. It's not a great place to be. But maybe this morning it got a little better. We all saw the breaking news. Davante Adams is no longer a Las Vegas Raider. He is now a teammate of Aaron Rodgers once again. He plays for the New York Jets. The Raiders were able to get a third-round pick guaranteed and potentially a second-round pick based off conditions being met. And the Jets are going to pay the entire salary of Davante Adams, or at least what's left of it. And now Rodgers has Adams, his best receiver, over his career. And now it's Rodgers and it's Wilson. We'll see what happens with Mike Williams, because now there's rumors of him being traded, or at least being shipped out of the door after the last 2 weeks and those 2 NOs that Rodgers threw to lose those games. It's a chaotic week in Jetland, and I guess we wouldn't have it any other way as football fans. And just when we thought that the day couldn't get any more crazy in the AFC East, Buffalo throws their name in the chat by trading for Amari Cooper. The price is not bad. They will also get a 6th, but they give up a 7, and the other part of this is Cleveland's going to get a 3rd-round pick back. This is far more than what Dallas did to give up Amari Cooper to the Browns in the first place. But it gets Josh Allen a bona fide number 1 receiver at a relatively affordable price. And for Buffalo, who is kind of an all-in team, can now go all in with Amari Cooper as your 1, Shakir and Coleman slotted properly as your slot receiver and your wide receiver 2. I think that's going to work out really well for the Bills, who are going to be just fine, as we've seen, because Josh Allen is handling business. And now you can't just go man coverage like they've been doing, defenses have been doing over the last few weeks. But back to those Jets, and those Broncos for that matter. What do those two teams have in common aside from playing an incredibly ugly game at MetLife a few weeks ago? They were the only two teams that I picked but lost for me last week. I went 12-2, and my overall record is 57-35. And with that, we get to the final stop of this train of thought. Tomorrow, power rankings. Who's in zombie tier? Who's in the title tier? There are so many things that have gone on, and there's some big-time games of interest that I'm going to be looking forward to. There's one constant, though. Carolina, like last week and a few other weeks this season, you will be the first stop of the next train of thought.